Good job. I wondered what he was going to say next, words of appreciation? And then, out of my husband's mouth, came something unbelievable. I'm setting you free. I'm giving you this bakery. I doubted my own ears. What are you talking about? My voice barely came out, but it didn't reach him. I've always thought it. You're my slave. Working from dawn till dusk, living every single day just for the sake of bread, right? I love running the bakery. I've never thought of myself as a slave. I resisted desperately. But my plea didn't reach my husband. Yet you resent me. I've never felt that way. I raised my voice, hoping to wake him up. No matter what you say, I don't want to be with you anymore. Just get it, will you? He raised his voice over mine. I couldn't say anything back. I stood up to follow him as he left, taking a step forward. The next moment, I tripped over something and felt myself falling. As I lost consciousness, I thought I heard my husband calling my name. The alarm clock rings at 5 a.m., the usual time. The bakery mornings are early. No, since my husband, Mark, starts preparing at 3 a.m., I'm actually taking it easy. I wash my face, get ready quickly, and head down to the workshop on the first floor. As I open the door, my husband is silently kneading the dough. Good morning. I greet him and start to help. He continues to knead the dough without a word. There's no conversation as I take the freshly baked bread out of the oven. But for 31 years, we've been running the store together like this. Now, it feels comfortable. Callie Martin, my name. I've been using this name longer than the one I had before marriage. And I suppose it will be my name until I leave this world. As I pondered such obvious things, the front door opened. Good morning. It's still pretty chilly today, huh? My niece, Rachel, came in. Is it that time already? Rachel is my husband's brother's daughter, and although she's already married, she comes to help out about 2 days a week. She works from 6:30 a.m. until 3 p.m. She's been interested in the bakery work since she was little, often peeking in. It's amazing how time flies. The little girl has now grown into a fine adult. You know, with Rachel here to help, why don't you take a little break? I suggested to my husband, and he replied with a barely audible yeah, waved lightly at Rachel, and went upstairs to our home. Uncle is still the same, huh? Rachel's eyes were smiling as she watched her uncle leave the workshop. I've always wondered, Callie, why did you marry Uncle? Rachel asked me while we were preparing to open the shop. Well, as I talked to Rachel, I was reminiscing about the past. Our meeting was 35 years ago. We worked together at a brokerage firm. My husband was in sales, and I was a secretary. We didn't interact much, but for some reason, I was drawn to him. Without ever speaking to him, I would just watch him from afar whenever I saw him in the office. One day, when I went back to the office to pick up something I forgot, I found him working overtime alone. I intended to leave without speaking to him as usual. But for some reason, I found myself heading to the break room. I think I was quite proactive. But at that time, it felt natural to make coffee for him. Good job, I said as I placed the coffee on his desk, and he looked up at me in surprise. Thank you. After he said that, a silence fell. Suddenly feeling embarrassed, I turned my back on him and hurried away from the spot. Just about finished here, so how about we grab some food after this? Suddenly, those unbelievable words hit me like a bolt from the blue. Huh? I turned around, but his gaze was not on me but on his desk. Could I have misheard? As I stood there confused, he spoke again. Please wait for me at the cafe downstairs. Yes. I nodded and walked away. I tried to calm my breathing as I took the elevator down. In the cafe on the ground floor of the building, I could see a few people from the same company, but I wondered if it was really okay for me to wait here. A mix of happiness and anxiety made me forget to even sip the orange juice I had ordered. Just before closing at 8 p.m. He arrived, panting. It took longer than I expected. No, that's not it. Sorry to keep you waiting. His flustered state was so amusing that I couldn't help but laugh. I'm starving. Where are you taking me? From that day on, my husband and I began to go out for meals together occasionally. The first place he took me was his favorite diner. Talk about no frills. After saying that, I changed the subject. The proposal is a secret to everyone. I've treasured it in my heart like a precious gem all this time. Well, it's almost time to open. The clock was about to strike 7 a.m. Our shop is in a shopping district. It's not as bustling as it used to be, but being close to the station, we still get a decent number of customers. It's just a regular town bakery, nothing famous or special. A customer from when my husband worked at a brokerage firm introduced us to this store. It was a turnkey shop, but it was enough for us. I was surprised when I first heard my husband wanted to start a bakery. Having watched my husband grow increasingly worn out from the excessive quotas at the brokerage firm, I quickly agreed when he suggested starting a bakery. He quit his job first and went to culinary school to learn baking, while I stayed at my job a bit longer to save up some startup capital. We didn't even have a wedding ceremony. Instead, we focused on opening our bakery, which we achieved about 30 years ago. My husband, the silent craftsman, and me, the cheerful face of our bakery. Everything was a first for us, and it was all quite challenging. Yet, I worked tirelessly, feeling fulfilled. Without the means to hire additional staff, we worked from dawn till dusk. Despite this, I became pregnant. My husband wanted to hire help so I wouldn't overexert myself, but I objected. I didn't want anyone else meddling in our store. I can see now that such pride was unnecessary, but back then, I was stubborn. And then, as if punished, the precious life inside me was lost. Moreover, I became unable to conceive again. I was engulfed in despair, not knowing how long I spent crying. Seeing me like this, my husband murmured, "I should have insisted on stopping you. I couldn't protect you and our unborn child. This isn't what I wanted for the sake of becoming a baker." His fists were trembling. "Let's quit the bakery," he said in a voice strained with emotion. Hearing this, I woke up. Who was I supposed to protect? Our unborn child was gone. Who was this person before me, ready to give up his dream? Hadn't I decided to support this man since the day he proposed to me? How could I, of all people, destroy his precious dream? Before I knew it, I was shouting, "We are not quitting the bakery." I looked straight into my husband's eyes. "I can't have children anymore. But this store is like our child, right? We've supported each other and raised this store together. Our customers have become regulars. We're starting to be loved as the local bakery in the shopping district. There's a different kind of challenge from when we were working corporate jobs, but my husband seems more alive now than ever before. That life was supposed to be our happiness." "I'm sorry." My husband hugged me tightly. "Look at me. You have nothing to apologize for. This store and our dream together, it's my purpose in life." He didn't say anything more, but I could feel his resolve in the strength of his embrace. Just as the customers thinned out, my husband came back. It wasn't for nothing we've been doing this for 30 years, and we have a routine down. Leaving Rachel in charge of the shop, I moved to the back. The morning bread is made by my husband, but the bread for the rest of the day is made by both of us. I've been learning from him and making my own recipes. I remember how nervous I was the first time my bread was displayed in the store so much so that I couldn't focus on cashiering whenever a customer paused in front of my bread, and I even got scolded for not paying attention to customers waiting to pay. Now, I don't worry about whether it sells, but it still makes me happy when it sells out. I hope a lot of people buy today. I whisper as I shape the bread. Glancing at the clock, it's past 10 a.m. Around this time is usually when I take a break. After putting the shaped bread in the oven, I call out to my husband. "Could you take out the bread I just put in once it's baked? I'm going to grab something to eat now." It's the usual routine. My husband would normally just nod without saying anything. But today was different. "Don't be so selfish. Take out your own baking when it's done." It's been a while since I heard my husband raise his voice. Shocked by the sudden outburst, I was left speechless. Rachel peered in from the front of the store. "What's wrong?" I smiled at Rachel, trying to act like everything was fine. It seems my husband is irritated. Even after yelling, he's taking it out on things around him. The sound of him slamming the dough is rough. I decided not to provoke him further and waited for the bread to finish baking. Then, I let Rachel, who was tending the shop, know and went upstairs. I let out a few secretly. With a sigh, I walked into the kitchen and noticed over-the-counter allergy medicine on the table. It was my husband's. Lately, he's been suffering from sneezing and itchy eyes, so I bought the medicine from the pharmacy the other day. I wondered if it was helped him at all. He's never had allergies before, so it was surprising when these symptoms suddenly started. I've been telling him to go to the doctor, but he hates hospitals and hasn't been motivated to go. His outbursts, like the yelling earlier, are probably due to how bad he's feeling. It seems over-the-counter meds aren't working, so we'll go to the doctor together on our next day off. Deciding this, I quickly ate some bread with tea poured over it to refuel and headed back to the shop. Sorry to keep you waiting, Rachel. I told Rachel I was back from my break. Callie, are you okay? Uncle seems kind of irritable. Rachel whispered, trying to gauge my husband's mood from behind the counter. He's been feeling a bit off lately. Rachel looked surprised at first but shrugged after seeing my husband. Don't worry, I won't let him hurt you. If anything happens, I'll stop him. He's already so quiet, it's kinda scary. But I'm used to it. My niece's comments show how quiet my husband usually is. It's rare to see him so visibly emotional. Hearing us talking, my husband called out from the back. He was still in a bad mood. I'll head back in before I get yelled at again. Call me if it gets busy, okay? And so, we continued working together. Even though he stopped responding to my attempts at conversation, I kept talking cheerfully. By the time Rachel left, we had finished baking the day's bread. My husband took another break before the evening rush. As I manned the shop, I reminisced about the old stories I had told Rachel that morning. I've always tried to support my husband and maintain a smile, no matter what. And tried to maintain a smile, no matter what. But now, it's not working. It seems my cheerfulness only makes his mood worse. Unlike when he was worn out from his corporate job. Wondering what to do about it, my husband returned, and soon the customers started to come in more frequently. I stopped pondering and focused on my work. During the evening rush, my husband was preparing for the next day. As the flow of customers slowed, I began to prepare for closing. At 7 p.m., we closed the shop. I shut the shutter and started preparing dinner. When my husband finished his preparations, he came upstairs. Great job today! I greeted him with a smile. Usually, he would respond with something, but today he silently went to the bathroom. I doubt he'd listen if I suggested going to the hospital in such a bad mood. I felt as though there was heaviness in my stomach. I'm not usually one to dwell on the details, but his blatant bad attitude is getting to me. After finishing dinner preparations, I went out to the balcony for a change of scenery. The night breeze felt good on my cheeks. Across the residential area, a train passed by. The sparkling view calmed my mind. I gazed at the distant buildings, remembering the days when I used to work there. Anyway, if he's this irritable because he's not feeling well, we really need to get him to the hospital. I thought to myself. If we don't solve this fundamentally, I'll continue to suffer. No matter what is said or happens, I'll take my husband to the hospital. I steeled my resolve and went back inside. After my husband came out of the bath, we had dinner together. This might be the only chance for a proper conversation. Hey, honey. I began, trying to gauge his mood. He seemed more relaxed after the bath, his usual self. This was my chance. How about we go to the hospital on our next day off? I'll come with you, I suggested lightly. He stared at me, then sighed deeply. The medicine we bought last time doesn't seem to work well. We're not getting any younger, so just to be safe, okay? Please. I tried to sound endearing, despite our age. He looked away and sighed again. Deeper and longer this time. Not giving up, I clasped my hands in front of my face, peeking at him through my fingers. Please? What am I doing at 58 years old? Just as I was about to retreat, he finally spoke. All right. What? I thought I had misheard, but I hadn't. All right, but try to speak more like your age. Surprisingly, he agreed to go to the hospital. A woman is always a maiden at heart, no matter her age. My usual cheerfulness returned. After thanking him brightly, I went back to the shop to check on the sales. Even though he remained irritable, especially when the shop was busy, I kept reminding myself it was just until we could get to the doctor. The day of the appointment finally arrived. We woke up more slowly than usual and I started making breakfast. Soon, my husband also got up. While we were eating, my husband muttered, "Are you coming with me?" I was watching TV, but at his words, I stood up to get ready, replying, "Yes. You hate hospitals, right? I thought it'd be better if we went together." As I placed our finished dishes in the sink, a loud bang came from behind me. Turning around, it seemed my husband had slammed the table. "What's wrong?" I tried to peer at his face, but his finger scratched against my cheek. I instinctively pulled back, and in doing so, I stumbled and fell. What just happened? He was never the type to raise his hand. As I crumbled, my husband loomed over me as if to add insult to injury. I covered my head with my arms, curling up to protect myself. Looking down at me, he spat out, "Always treating me like a child. I can go to the hospital by myself." With that, he stormed out of the house. How long I remained stunned, I couldn't say. The sound of a single water droplet from the sink snapped me back to reality. Despite his irritability and harsh words, I accepted him entirely, wanting to be by his side. Was my support just selfishness? He was a kind man, silent but gentle. I knew the man who smiled softly at flowers blooming on the roadside and birds perched on power lines. Starting the bakery was about making people happy and spreading joy. His hands, when kneading dough, were supposed to embody that intention. I never thought the same hands would be used to hurt me. I couldn't believe it. No, I didn't want to believe it. Once we visit the hospital and find out it's nothing serious, he'll surely return to his usual self. Even if he apologizes, I might pretend to stay mad for a while. Once his condition improves, I'll let him take me out for a nice meal as a way of making up. I wonder if that diner where we first went out to eat is still open. In those times, I had no way of knowing. I was about to face something even more tragic. My husband, who should have been at the hospital first thing in the morning, didn't return until the evening. I thought he might have been killing time somewhere, feeling awkward about having lashed out at me, since it wasn't anything serious. But after dropping his bag at home, he immediately went down to the shop. I guessed he was still feeling awkward. Trying to change the mood, I decided to approach him, heading down the stairs. The sound of banging and clattering came from the workshop. Preparing for tomorrow? But it was unusually loud. Peeking in, I was shocked. "What are you doing?" My husband was throwing his baking tools onto the floor in a rage. I tried desperately to stop him, but I was no match for his strength and ended up slumped on the floor. "Stop it, please!" Lacking physical strength, I shouted as loudly as I could. My voice seemed to reach him, and he stopped, panting heavily, and slowly turned to look at me. His eyes were filled with resentment and sadness. "What happened?" I asked gently, trying not to provoke him further. After recognizing me in tears, he started laughing. It was as if something evil had possessed him. Even a sense of madness. "What's going on?" The man before me was no longer the husband I knew. It felt like I was facing a stranger. Grinning, he said to me, "Well done." I wondered what he would say next, words of appreciation. Then, unbelievable words came out of his mouth. "I'm setting you free. I'm giving you this bakery." I couldn't believe my ears. "What are you talking about?" My voice barely came out, but it didn't reach him. "I've always thought it. You're my slave, working from morning till night, becoming infertile, living every single day just for the sake of bread, right? I love running the bakery. I've never thought of myself as a slave." I resisted desperately. "I don't remember being overworked. Even after becoming infertile. Didn't we talk about this? That this shop is like our child." But my plea didn't reach my husband. "Yet you resent me." "I've never felt that way." I raised my voice, hoping to wake him up. "No matter what you say, I don't want to be with you anymore. Just understand that." He raised his voice over mine. I couldn't say anything back. Seeing I was silent, he turned his back silently and headed for the shop's entrance. I stood up from where I had been crouched on the floor, took a step to stop him. The next moment, I tripped over something, knowing I was falling. As I lost consciousness, I thought I heard my husband calling my name. When I woke up, I was in an unfamiliar place. How long had I been unconscious? I looked around. I was lying in a bed, surrounded by curtains. And 4 was in my arm, and my right leg was in a cast, suspended. I realized I was in a hospital but had no idea what had happened to me. How did I end up here after losing consciousness? Could my husband have? Holding on to a sliver of hope, I pressed the nurse call button. Eventually, a nurse came and explained what had happened in my condition, but none of the words I hoped to hear were spoken. The hospital had tried to contact my husband, but they couldn't reach him no matter how many times they called. It seemed Rachel had been contacted and had taken care of all the necessary paperwork. I let out a deep sigh. Where could my husband be right now? What could he be doing? With my mind still in a daze, I cycled through various thoughts until eventually, fatigue took over, and I fell back asleep. My diagnosis was overexertion and a fractured right leg. It happened when I tried to get up and confront him, tripping over a freestanding mixer that was left out, resulting in my fall and fracture. How pathetic. A month passed before I was discharged from the hospital. I had inquired about my husband's whereabouts with Rachel, who visited me, but she said, "I don't know either." It seems he hasn't contacted Dad. It appeared he had genuinely vanished. On the day of my discharge, I hastily completed the procedures, eager to get back home. I couldn't count how many times I had blamed myself during my stay at the hospital. I intended well, but it turned out my husband found it distressing, and I wanted to apologize to him as soon as possible. I attempted to forcefully open the home's door. But it was locked. Was nobody there? I fetched the keys from my bag, unlocked the door, and went inside. The air was slightly stale in the quiet, musty space. "I'm home!" I called out, but my voice merely got absorbed into the room's depth. I took off my shoes and entered. The room looked much more spacious than I remembered. I felt nobody's presence as I returned home after a long time. And soon realized my husband's belongings were gone. I sat down on the spot for a while but eventually decided to check on the store. With a little wobble, I got up, dragging my poorly moving leg along, and made my way downstairs. The mixer workbenches were covered with sheets, signaling they hadn't been used for a considerable time. Will these machines never operate again? I wondered if I would ever see the smiling faces of our customers. I can't do this on my own. My heart was crying so. That our shop of 30 years could end so abruptly was unthinkable. I had believed I was supporting my husband, but I've come to realize that, in fact, he was the one supporting me. Remembering the days that will never return, I wept bitterly. Humans get hungry no matter what, and I was no exception. I went back home to satisfy my hunger, only to find expired milk, eggs, meat turning an off-putting color, and vegetables in the fridge. Stepping outside to buy something, I encountered a man standing there. "Mr. Taylor?" He was a lawyer my husband knew. He was a lawyer acquainted with my husband, a regular at the bakery and someone we've known since working at the brokerage firm. Knowing his profession, I had a bad feeling. "I was planning to visit around the time Mrs. Martin was discharged from the hospital. I'm glad I could meet you." I didn't want to meet him. Unable to say this outright, I could only muster a forced smile. We entered a cafe on the shopping street. The owner, whether he knew the situation or not, acted in an unusually formal way towards us. As our coffee was served, Mr. Taylor began to speak. "I've been entrusted with this for you." He handed me an envelope. "You probably know what's inside." Before opening the envelope, I took a sip of coffee. The hunger in my stomach twisted into pain. Inside, as expected, were divorce papers and various other documents. I silently returned them to the envelope. After a prolonged silence, Mr. Taylor sniffled. Perhaps he had allergies too. When I finally looked up, surprised by what I saw. "Mr. Taylor? Why are you crying?" Tears were streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I just can't hold it in any longer." Confused, I was just fidgeting. Eventually, Mr. Taylor seemed to regain his composure after taking a deep breath. Then, after an embarrassed smile, he spoke as if he'd made up his mind. "Actually, I was told to keep quiet. But, you see, I'm also a fan of your bakery. I'd hate to see it go under." According to Mr. Taylor, my husband's condition turned out to be an allergy. Allergy to pollen? No, to wheat. I was shocked. I can only imagine how much more shocked my husband, the actual person involved, must have been. Discovering he had developed a wheat allergy and couldn't continue running the bakery, my husband had decided to leave the bakery and all his assets to me, planning to live somewhere he wouldn't be recognized. He had a hunch about it even before seeing a doctor. That explained his irritability and taking it out on me. though he felt terribly guilty for doing so. Thank you for telling me, even though you weren't supposed to. I quickly shared an idea I had with Mr. Taylor. That's a brilliant idea. Please let me know once it's all set up. Mr. Taylor smiled happily, and we left the cafe. Weeks later, I contacted Mr. Taylor. He took me to a location about 20 minutes by train from our home. In a residential area with several hills, we saw an old apartment. It's there. After climbing the hill and looking back, I could see the building of the brokerage firm where I used to work. Despite all the things that happened, I chuckled, and Mr. Taylor looked puzzled. Sorry, it's nothing. Shall we go? Following Mr. Taylor, we climbed the stairs to the second floor of the apartment. Mr. Taylor knocked on a door. A voice from inside responded. It's Taylor, coming in. The room was dim, but it was clear someone lived there. Mr. Taylor entered familiarly. I couldn't move from the entrance. Right inside, there was a kitchen and dining area, with one room further in. From the room, a familiar voice called out. Come on, don't just stand there, come in. Urged by Mr. Taylor, I peered into the back room. You! What are you doing here? As he spoke, he glared at Mr. Taylor. You set me up! My husband was trembling with clenched fists but suddenly started coughing. See, you shouldn't overdo it. You were told to rest, weren't you? My husband coughed painfully. I wanted to rush to him but restrained myself. I shouldn't inconvenience my husband with my unilateral emotions. Sensing my feelings, Mr. Taylor spoke to me. Look, Mrs. Martin. You had something to give him today, right? Prompted by his words, I remembered and handed my husband the paper bag I was holding. I heard everything from Mr. Taylor. I just couldn't give up. My husband peeked inside the bag. I made a prototype. What he pulled out of the bag was bread. This is rice flour bread. It should be okay even with a wheat allergy, right? I tried to sound playful. My husband took a bite of the bread I made. I could see his expression brighten instantly. Maybe we don't have to give up the bakery or get divorced, right? In the dimly lit room, I clearly saw tears glistening on my husband's cheeks. Years later. The alarm goes off at 7 a.m. Downstairs in the shop, work had already started. I got ready and headed down to the workshop. Shall we switch? I took over the work from my husband. It's been a few years since then, but our bakery is still running. However, it's not a wheat bakery anymore, it's a rice flour bakery. Rice flour bread made by a wheat allergic owner has been featured in the media, and now we have customers coming from far away. Good morning. It's still cold, isn't it? But I'm glad you pushed back the opening time, it really helps. Rachel, who has had a child and leaves them with her husband's parents, still comes to help out. She's also started making bread in the workshop. As we prepared the dough together, we reminisced about old times. I still want to hear about the proposal. I told you, it's a secret. When my husband came back to the shop, he said the same words he had during his proposal. He probably doesn't remember. I couldn't help but chuckle. Callie, you just remembered and laughed, didn't you? Rachel teased. Come on, stop laughing and focus on the prep. Rachel muttered in agreement. Those words are my treasure. Now and forever. Please continue to light up my life with your brightness.